So this is the second of our three-part series on disability, and in this video we're going to look at social discrimination against disabled people and set out some context to help you understand why disability can have a medical cause, but not in the way that you might think. Employment and education. These are two institutions we're all expected to participate in at one time or another in our lives. And the following are government figures from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare and the Australian Bureau of Statistics. So, first off, the AIHW. They cite 20% of disabled people aged 15 to 64 left school before the age of 16, compared with only 8.6% of non-disabled people. And only 34% of disabled people aged 20 and over have completed Year 12, compared with 66% of non-disabled people. In relation to higher ed, university, only 17% of disabled people have completed a bachelor degree, compared with 35% of non-disabled people. What about employment? In Australia, disabled people are more than twice as likely to be unemployed as non-disabled people. Australia has one of the lowest disability employment participation rates among OECD countries. We rank 21st out of the 29 countries. And it's worse for disabled women. The Australian Bureau of Statistics report that 51% of disabled women are employed compared to 56% of disabled men. And if employed, disabled women receive lower wages than men and are more likely to be in precarious or insecure employment. What this amounts to is the social exclusion of many disabled people from education and employment. Now, maybe these statistics reflect a problem with the disabled people not being good students or good workers. Well, no. We have plenty of evidence to show that's not the case. In relation to employment, disabled people are often more productive, take less time off sick, and are more loyal. And a lot of this is because disabled people have to work harder to prove their worth, and they're less able to move from job to job because of the discrimination in the labour market. It's very much a problem with the way education and employment are structured. Now let's talk about what are the major causes of impairment, and you might find some surprises here. People generally think that disabled people are mostly born with an impairment or acquire an impairment later in life due to some medical reason, and they think genetics plays a key role in all of it. And there's been vast sums of money that have been poured into medical and genetic research that seeks to find the biological and genetic causes of impairment. But what we actually find is that impairment is rarely genetic and seldom has a biological cause. Here we're talking about broad statistics, big picture stuff. Of course, some people acquire impairments due to genetic or biological problems, but that makes up only a small proportion of disabled people. 90% of impairment is caused by socioeconomic factors like poverty. Indeed, poverty is the biggest cause of impairment. This is not because disabled people become poor when they become disabled, though that does happen. You lose your job when you become disabled because you face discrimination in the labour market, and then you end up in poverty. But yeah, that happens. But mostly what we find is that disabled people become disabled because they're poor. That's why you find many more disabled people in so-called developing countries. Those countries aren't poor because they have more disabled people. They have more disabled people because they're poor. So worldwide, 1 in 5 people acquire an impairment due to such things as the effects of malnutrition. Among the other major causes of impairment, physical abuse, industrial accidents, environmental pollution, and effects of psychological stress. Now, all of these are environmental causes. They're not biological causes. And what's interesting here is that it's actually not true to say that there's rarely a medical cause for impairment. But it's not true for a surprising reason. And that's because one of the major causes of impairment is actually medical intervention. This is called iatrogenesis, which is when death or disease is caused by a medical intervention. This is a problem that started at the time that medicine was achieving its biggest successes in public health in the 18th century, such as with the smallpox vaccine. The medical profession gained power and authority at that time as it helped to deal with the horrors of infectious disease that spread during the Industrial Revolution. And the profession's power continued to grow in the 19th century, but so did iatrogenic death and disease. Now, it's hard to get an accurate figure on how many people are impacted by iatrogenesis, largely because of the issue of underreporting. Doctors and hospitals don't often own up to their mistakes because when they make mistakes, people can die. And that means that if they get sued for making those mistakes, you get sued for very, very large sums of money. Such large sums of money that it would threaten the viability of a medical practice. So that's why the underreporting goes on. But in spite of the problem of underreporting, what we know is that in the US, the medical system has been cited as the leading cause of death and injury. Now, the irony here is that the US spends more on healthcare than any other country. Now, that sounds really counterintuitive. You know, the more you spend on medical care, the more people are helped, but also the more people are harmed. And this situation is being called Pharmageddon. Pharmageddon is the prospect of medicines doing more harm than good. And the name comes from the major culprit in all of this, pharmaceutical drugs. And many commentators are saying we're fast approaching that point, with some saying we've already gone past that point. We've got many examples of pharmaceutical drugs doing tremendous harm, and a lot of these are psychopharmaceutical drugs prescribed for mental illnesses. And a well-known example of this is Largactil, which is a tranquilizer that caused brain damage in around 25 million people. Now, the anti-vaccination protests were wrong about COVID. Remember the anti-vaxxers during the COVID years? We're still in the COVID years, I know, but not at the height of it. Well, the reason the anti-vaxxers gained traction was because there was a kernel of truth to what they were saying, that medicines can do you harm, and that this is covered up by the medical profession and the pharmaceutical industry. This is not conspiracy theory. It's been fully documented. The work of David Healy is good to have a look at here. But what happened during the anti-vaxxer stuff is that it also showed a truth behind one of the reasons for the medical profession's cover-up, that people are not good at understanding probabilities associated with risk, and that can mean that they confuse dangerous medicines with safe ones. And we saw that misunderstanding play out with the public response to that research that was coming out over the AstraZeneca version of the COVID vaccines. I've got a video on my YouTube channel where I discuss those issues in relation to how the public doesn't get probability statistics when it comes to drug risk. Okay, so you can go watch that video if you're interested. Now, in the 18th and 19th centuries, more people were being saved by medicine than harmed by medicine. So it was ethical not to draw the public's attention to those deaths, people who died from taking medicine. If the public became aware of the risk of iatrogenic death, they might not come forward for any medical help at all. But the public's awareness of the risks of medicine has been increasing over recent years, in spite of the sort of cover-up that's going on from the medical profession. And that's because of some major drug scandals. So in the 1960s, the public's attention was dramatically drawn to the dangers of medicine with the thalidomide drug. And there's been a growing awareness since the 1960s of the dangers of psychotherapeutic medicines, in particular the antidepressant medications. And the attempts to turn attention away from all of that has increased. But here, this is not only coming out of an ethical concern from the medical profession that people might be turned away from getting the help that they need, but it's come out of commercial concern of the pharmaceutical industry, who have considerable commercial interests in those drugs. And the vast sums of money that have been poured into medicine have set up lots of those vested interests. And what's unsettling here is that this has been happening in spite of non-medical causes of disability being much more common and most impairments not requiring sophisticated, costly medical interventions. Here's a nice little quote about this. So, social attention and resources are being deflected into medical technology and professional salaries when they could be providing nutrition, social support, and other low technology strategies to minimize disability or to cushion its impact. And this is a crucial point, and the crucial point that guides us to the social model of disability. And we're going to look at that in the third and final part of this series on disability. So till then, ta-da.